All right, so let's see. Today I want to talk about two authors basically, which is Gurdjieff and Ichazo, because you don't often hear people talking about them, and yet they are some of the most important authors and Enneagram pioneers. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the triads, the instinctual triads, go back to Gurdjieff. And those are arguably the core foundation, the framework of the Enneagram. And, you hear a lot about Naranjo and later authors, R&H and their students and all that stuff. But people don't talk about Ichazo or Gurdjieff that much. And, the head, the heart, and the gut triad, the intellectual center, the emotional center, and the action center. There were different ways of describing them, but they were very specific. And Gurdjieff referenced these. This was already in place. This was before there was copyright. And with the Enneagram, you're looking at a oral tradition. A lot of it wasn't written down. You can read a book nowadays, and that's great. So much of it has been compiled, but I think a lot of it hasn't as well, or isn't well documented. And that's why it's challenging. That's why it's considered occult, esoteric knowledge. So Ichazo did some really nice things. It's interesting that nobody really wants to read his work, given how incredibly important it was, and given that all of the other authors after Ichazo followed his core ideas, just as he fell in line with Gurdjieff's ideas before him. However, we still talk about the head, the heart, and the gut triad. People, they use all the same logic and the same terminology, but they don't realize the lineage of it. So, the gut. First, let's talk about Gurdjieff's 5 lower centers. There were 5 of them, and they were what I just described: the 3, the head, the heart, and the gut. And they also included, the instinctive center, which came to be known for SP, and also the sex center, which became SX. Naranjo went ahead and came up with the social instinct. Ichazo only had SP and SX, but Naranjo got together with him and they sat down, and what they did was, first of all, these are places in the body. The gut triad, it's in the stomach. You can feel it in the stomach. If you sit there, we all have that butterflies feeling in the stomach when something's wrong and something, agitates us. There can be fear there, but it's more a matter of when something is wrong, when we're threatened. And Ichazo helped us understand that this is when our sense of being, our well-being, is changed or threatened. Something changes, and we feel it in our gut. And the gut types, they feel it more. There's a stronger energy there. That's where the tension is. That's where the fixation is. And of course, if you are, each of the gut types does something different with it. Okay, if you're an 8, then you have a hard time not listening to it and not reacting. It just sort of goes off, and you do things, and it's a strength, for the 8s. They tend to be action-oriented people. They tend to be decisive because they can listen to that. That's where their strongest energy magnet is. Okay, but it can cause them problems too. It's a matter of moderation, okay? If you're a 9, then you just kind of habitually don't listen to it, and it goes off and you do nothing. You just kind of let it go, let it ride, fall asleep to it. And we know what that does for nines. So I won't go in total depth as to all the types here, but the one, of course, feels that, and instead of just reacting like the 8 and following that impulse, they hone it, and they're disciplined, and they try to do things with integrity, and they don't do what they want to do, which is explode, because that's an explosive, something's not right kind of a feeling. That's the gut triad tells us how we're doing. It gives us information about how we are. Are we okay or not? Do we like this thing or not? Is it a threat or not? And that's felt in the stomach. The butterflies in the stomach kind of a feeling. It's very concrete the way it was understood and the way it correlated. And next there's the heart, which is the heart space is the lungs and the heart rate. Okay, so this is what you feel when you're about to get on stage. You'll notice your heart starts pumping more, or when you're a little bit nervous, your breathing gets a little bit shaky and you have to take breaths, or your breathing slows down, or whatever. That's the heart triad. There's a particular time that your body has these reactions. This isn't just figurative stuff, it's literal as well. Okay, so that's why the heart types, the 3 is the performer, because they detach from that, right? They don't let that get to them. Their heart could be boom, 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 but they can detach from it. And their breath could be messed up, and it tells us, how it connects to how we're feeling. Again, different from the gut sensation, but tells us something different about our experience. And Ichazo studied how it worked as a system in a given person, in a given order. There's a cycle to it, okay? So the heart types, they have a fixation point there. The 3 can detach from it. Again, the asleep version from the gut triad for the 9, these are the attachment types. The 3 can numb to it more and detach from it, okay? And the 4, kind of amplifies the negativity of it, of, oh my gosh, I'm really feeling this. This is so bad, or this is so good, Okay, so that's the heart triad. The 2 focuses more on the positive side, is more humble, prideful about it, and oh my gosh, I'm so nervous, and there's just kind of a different energy there. But they feel it. All the heart types feel that more, and that's their pivot point. That's more of a pivot point for them. That's the energy. As the energy moves, that's their sticking point. That's where they feel the biggest trigger, fixation, center of gravity. And the head triad is thinking, planning, what's going to happen, right? Plans, analysis. We all use all 3 of these. That's why there's the trifix. That's because Ichazo identified it, and so did Gurdjieff. That's why he talked about the 4th way. There were 3 ways. We integrate them. You get to the 4th way, which is something else, right? It's kind of understanding all of them, and then you can find a new way from that. So the head is, thinking about stuff. It was connected to fear, right? The other day I was freaked out, and I found my thoughts racing. What's going to happen? You start really, talking to yourself, and, thinking to yourself, and and what's going to happen, and picturing scenarios, and you kind of fake yourself out with all these thoughts, right? So that's the head triad. The 6 kind of gets lost in it, detaches from it. It's all just kind of going on, and they don't know what to do with it, right? All right. And 7, we know, is, focuses towards positivity and idealistic thoughts, and is likely to come up with a positive plan and escapism, and here we go. I'm thinking, and now I'm moving, I'm doing stuff, I'm out in the world, and I'm on top again, right? The 5 pulls back inside and kind of analyzes, focuses, observes, quiets down. All right. Okay. And, Naranjo connected these to the instincts. All right. Naranjo and Ichazo both, they connected these to the instincts, the stacking stuff, the subtypes, those instincts, okay? And he identified that, connected the sexual instinct, which is literally the sexual center in the body, is literally the genital region, what you use sex for, okay? It's pretty logical. But he connected that with the heart. That makes sense. Has anybody here ever had sex? What happens when you orgasm? Your heart rate speeds up, right? I mean, what happens when, your breath speeds up? So there's a strong connection there. There's a logic to it, okay? What about social for the head, for, motor, for thinking, for learned stuff, right? You're thinking about what's going on out there in the world. It takes conscious thought to juggle all these different people and these ideas and these intellectual concepts. It's more of a head triad thing. And when you're around a lot of people, or you're trying to overanalyze what to do around people, to figure out the rules, you're probably using more of this, this head center, so these were correlated. And likewise for the body, for movement, with self-preservation, you're thinking, what am I going to do? Am I safe? Am I going to get out of there? Am I comfortable? Do I have power? Do I have what I need? Are my boundaries safe? So these were all connected, and it moves in the Enneagram clockwise. I can notice it in myself. If somebody, calls me up and something comes in, into the machine, into the system, I feel first in my gut, oh my gosh, what's that, right? That I'm upset about that, or, I'm ready for it. Even before it hits, I'm ready for my gut to tell me, you got to do something here, right? It's ready to go, and once I start to act, often there's the pump, pump, pump. It goes into the heart triad next. There's the thinking, there's the feeling, there's the feeling center of, racing heart, or my breath changes, that anxiety, it moves through my body like a system. And then finally you get into the headspace, which can help to slow it down sometimes of, all right, let's think this through a little bit, what's really going on. So there's a logic to it. It wasn't just made up. Ichazo was very, very devoted to putting these into a more concrete form and studying them with people and identifying them. So it's one really, I think a solid way to type yourself is understand what the triads are figuratively, but literally as well. Where you're feeling that energy and that pull. Where do you get, what causes you problems, right? What gets you into trouble, but what's a strength as well? Like, I'm an 8. I act quickly, confidently, impulsively. It can be a strength. I have confidence and decisiveness, and I always have. But it can also cause me huge problems because I can go too far, too fast. And it's both. It's a double-edged sword, Of course, I also think everybody thinks and everybody feels. Everybody has these, centers that give us issues. But for me, I identify it in action, that my actions are where the biggest fixation is. So that's a way to figure it out. I think that the head types, they get lost in thought a great deal and, think, and then they make the wrong decision. I hardly ever make the wrong decision when I think a lot. Usually I'm thinking more because it's my last center on there. Thinking more can help. In disintegration, I'll lean into it for power. I'll think more, contemplate. It's natural for me to go from action into a kind of a on the stage performer kind of fight or flight thing with, the pumping heart. It's natural for me to do that stuff. But for me to really think it through and look at all the outcomes and, choose between them and do some real thinking here, not just impulsing, that could really help me. So that's common with the type 8. The type 5 or the type 6 is often the opposite. It's like the more they think, the more trouble they get themselves into, and they can benefit from using their last center, which is, more feeling. What do they really want? They often move from a lot of thinking into action. So, they think, and then they go for it. And then they have their feelings, right? They don't pay enough attention to what their feelings tell them, what they really want, what matters to them, what's valuable to them, what affects them as an individual, as the story of them, as a person, as their reputation, all of that stuff, which is more in the heart triad space, their relationships. And so this is unconventional Enneagram wisdom. I don't think you're going to hear it really anywhere else, but it's directly from Ichazo, and Gurdjieff studied this as well. Some of the later authors disregarded it and changed the order of things just a little bit, but I think that the work that was done before that was extremely important. And if you can just look at what Gurdjieff had, already he had the 3 centers, he had the whole Enneagram, he had the 5 centers, so it included 2 of the instincts already, and it included the 3 instinctual triads, and the Enneagram itself that was identical to the one that's used today. And so, he was studying similar things. He was looking for a chief feature, which was a blockage to awakening. He was looking for the Enneagram type and the Enneagram fixation. He was using the 3 centers, looking for the 4th way, integrating the 3 of them. This was all the groundwork for what people, did later on. But people have learned, they've learned later stuff first, and they didn't want to learn the older stuff. So they've learned RNH, and they've learned all the Hornevian, harmonic, attached, object relation stuff. They've learned RNH like the back of their hand. I think that, came from Karen Horney and some these other people. It's post-Nerano stuff, and they should focus on the core fundamentals, because all of that came from Gurdjieff and Ichazo. And that's really where the other stuff is derived from, you see. That came next, that came afterwards, and we still use the core material. So people need to focus more on that and really understanding the triads and how the Enneagram functions. I'm sure people find me condescending and everything talking about this, but it just gets old to see people willfully, not learning about this stuff, even as more information is released from, the internet and books and oral traditions. You need to understand the triads as Gurdjieff understood them, as Ichazo did, and learn about their different names. The social instinct was, connected to the motor or intellectual head center. That was how it was understood. You can change it if you want, but that connection will always be there because it was innate. It was something that was discovered. They made the connection, and it made perfect sense. So then to take that template and to throw it out and say, well, we've changed it to something else while still paradoxically using it, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, everybody should be following the same Enneagram here, because it literally is the same Enneagram. It's built on the same principles. So, of course, the passions, the 7 deadly sins, the 7 sins, really it was the 8 evil thoughts that I talked about in a post, which, included sorrow. There was sorrow instead of envy. Things were moved around a little bit, but it included everything except for vainglory, which was added, because that was, when it went from 8 to 7, they took vainglory and they took it away and they merged it with pride. Okay, but the Enneagram was a little bit more nuanced and identified 9 of them and connected them to these triads, right? The 3 centers. And it evolved over time. Ichazo did his best to define the chief features that he felt Gurdjieff was trying to define, that he didn't write down, that was more occulted stuff, and you can research the types of chief features that Gurdjieff would use. He would kind of mix and match them, which would make sense. He would give each individual person a unique profile, which would make sense because we know there are about 1,000 combinations. So everyone would get something very unique and individual. Even using today's Enneagram terminologies, you have the trifix, the wing, the stacking, all of that. You got 1,000 combinations. So people did get a very individualized, chief feature analysis of their fixation, their spiritual fixation, and it was tied into the Enneagram, and Gurdjieff used it like a map. So it was well intact. They used different terminology and language, but it's the same thing. It's exactly the same as it looks. The only time when you're not looking the same Enneagram is if you go back to the Kircher Enneagram, which was from the 1600s, and it's similar. There's some similarities there. He studied cosmologies. He was a polymath, and he studied cosmology, but his Enneagram looks a little bit different, okay? And Pythagoras' Enneagram looks much different. He had the original one, but it didn't look like that. You can find it on YouTube. It doesn't look the same, but it is still an Enneagram, and this was the early source that Gurdjieff possibly used. Some of this information is occulted. It's hidden. It's not necessarily known. Gurdjieff was a Sufi, and they would use symbols, to show spiritual processes, and the Enneagram is one of those. It's also similar to a hieroglyph from ancient Egypt. It's also similar to sacred geometry. It can be considered sacred geometry, which goes back to Plato, and the Platonic solids, and it's just everything connects. If you go back in history and connect all these different disciplines, it all connects, and that's why the best Enneagram teachers, the most famous ones, the ones that we should listen to the most, studied a huge number of disciplines. Ichazo, Naranjo, and Gurdjieff, those three main guys, they studied a number of different disciplines, from different religions, different spiritualities. That's because the Enneagram is a fusion. It's a coming together of different esoteric systems and traditions to make this kind of a super powerful tool, spiritual tool. So it's good to know what those parts are, where those came from, right? To not just read, RNH or anyone individually, a Maitrey or Palmer or Daniel. It's not just to read their one portrait, but to understand, to go back and figure out where, the inception point was. Where did it start? What were those ingredients? You really have to kind of study everything to understand it. And Gurdjieff himself, believed that everything could be mapped into it. And it started out going back through, Kirchner and going back all the way to Pythagoras of studying cosmologies, which is kind of studying everything. Before we had science, they used more philosophical, conceptual, spiritual ideas. So the Enneagram, it's not, it's kind of a science of its own, but you can't get it to do things that it wasn't designed to do as well. So it's good to listen to the traditional stuff too. You have to learn that. If you don't learn that, you're not going to understand the Enneagram. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Okay, thank you. I hope this is enjoyable.